I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. If you would like to have one of your tracks featured in one of these videos, feel free to head on down to the description of this video where you will find a link to my Discord, which on top of being a community full of people who are into production and whatnot, it is also where the VTR submissions channel is, complete with rules and also moderators around to help you most of the time, make sure your things like stuff is named properly and whatnot so that I can have a whole list of stuff from which I pick the 7 randomly that get played on the day. Today starts with Hexes from Meakashi. Let us see what this sounds like, shall we? All right, here we go. You are starting at the beginning? Yeah, cool. Alrighty. I like the rhythmic inclination. I like the sound choices, but oh boy, were they too harsh on the highs. Some of the highs in this track were some of the most powerful highs I've heard in a while still having a mix that was essentially still mixed correctly. This is not really even like a mistake. You wanted this. All the parts of this are correct. Like you have all the bits, you're doing all what you need to do, and you really just put a lot of power where it was a little too much power. So, in particular, what was too much power was not even, this is kind of a difficult discussion because you might think that the solution to how high the highs are in this would be to just EQ off a lot of the highs. But the roll off wasn't actually that bad. Like this presence is hot, but that's not the problem. The problem is when there's this unsaturated harmonic width. Like to say that like this is a really thin, wide, you mostly are hearing this individual side portion of the sound versus something like this, which is mostly a wash. This is almost the same power as this. This is really loud and really one real particularly piercing frequency. If this whole thing, you can see this is white and this is not really white, but if this whole thing was white, that would be very, very obviously too hard. But the other kind of things that aren't white are usually things like basses and the kicks and things. And higher than that, the if you get this kind of loudness, it's piercing. And in a kind of, you might be damaging yourself kind of way. And here's these other sounds, like mixing these is hard because of this problem. Like for example, this white noise burst, like you'd think that this would be one of the candidates of something to clamp down on, but it's not as much a problem as some of the other sounds are. And it has to do with the fact that its power is spread out over a bunch of harmonics, whereas this thing's power, go over there, damn it, is very concentrated. So the answer isn't so much to just grab a range of frequency and EQ it down. It's make it so that a particular thing's performance isn't this high at this width. So you either do bring whatever this is in this particular bit down, or you add more to it, surround it. And you kind of already are doing that a little. And this is what I mean by you did everything right anyway. You have all the right parts and the right background fullness and the right amount of like structural depth in things. You have all that. And it's mostly just that you've allowed things that are typically dangerous with this much power to have the power that they usually don't have. And it's strange that I'm coming at it from this angle, but it's because you don't normally get this far without having other problems, which is why I knew that, like, you more or less knew that you got here and did this. And it's because normally pushing this kind of power would destabilize everything. The fact that it doesn't implies that you do at least know how to mix. You know how to mix, you know how to sidechain and separating the subs. Like, this is mostly a consideration about this very explicitly specific sound design style of letting, like, the octave, like, range of things ring out and not so much else. It just concentrates a lot of what would be that amount of power, but in one place. So it's a little bit like the difference between somebody pushing on you with a hand versus pushing on you with something sharp. Anyway, moving on from that. Up next, we have Malmawt from Ynhal. Ynhal? YNHL. I think that's a name I've attempted to pronounce a number of times, and don't know if I've gotten it yet. We'll find out. But we'll also find out what this sounds like right now. That was awesome. That like, oh wow. Everything about this is just beautiful. Holy crap. I'm gonna use this to talk about a lot of stuff I mentioned in the last track. Wow. Amon Tobin and Aphex Twin would be very proud of you for this. Holy everything. Wow. I'm super impressed by this. Um the thing that impressed me the most about it was that the setup of the stuff worked in numerous configurations of both speed and density. More or less the same consideration. The idea of that like there's these moments of like really fast drum beats, and then there's like sort of the slower ideas, and they both work, and that's hard to do with a single kit of stuff, without making one section of speed or type suffer, and but like no section or speed of this suffered. This was a second by second consideration, and it shows. And like this felt like watching a demo reel, like watching a CG artist's like dev studio demo reel for Avengers Endgame stuff. Like that's what this sounded like, but the audio version, like if you have a page up where you want to be like, this is my portfolio, I want to work in video games or something, put this up. I cannot imagine someone not hiring you. Wow. Like this is super on point. So let's talk about some of the on pointness. I pointed out a couple of times stuff like this. Let's listen to this particular little expression of sound real quick over this cacophony of powerful madness. Now, it is just a solid tone, and it's not moving around like the stuff was in the last track. The stuff was very pitchy, and that was the point. But one thing I want to point out is that the part where how sharp it was harmonically, as in to say it was not very blended like a noise burst is, means that how much it cuts through is more powerful. It's like it's not linearly powerful anymore. It can be heard more, and it is basically, as much as we can tell, like literally what this visual representation is. When we look at it like this is exactly how hidden it is to our brains as we can see it in our eyes right here. And that last track, when you have more, you can have more power to make a thing more powerful. If you wanted the thing to be a lead or the main element, you could have it be louder. But the point is, if it's this thin, you don't have to. It will still cut through because it is that thin. Because you can tell this specific thing against a cloud of bursty widthy stuff. Just like looking at it in the vector scope and using the stereo width to determine sort of a visual version of space. That's looking at this from the side, literally the mid and the side. If you can imagine this, that we're looking at right here, we're looking at this long, thin roll of paper. Looking at the vector scope is like looking at this from the edge of the paper, with the 3D representation on the left and right being the level of stereo activity. And just like we can see it kind of show up in this dimension, this angle, so too does controlling it in the mid and side have it show up in that dimension and that angle. And you could have either or, you could have neither, and you can use this in multiple different instruments to help a thing exist in space in such a way that when you do put it together in this cloud of nonsense, that it actually comes through as something you can read as individual. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that great? I love looking at this stuff. Anyway, also elements about how loud and power. So elements like, oh boy, these middle bits are the best. This stuff, I love it. Some super basic, just to have like a reverse kick into something, but it is so effective. This stuff, this is illusion of power things, right? Because how hard things are being pushed around or whatever. The kick ended here. It's over. But the power of the hit is this whole unified experience because that's how it was sculpted. And there's not a lot of ways to do this other than to just do it. I try to come up with a lot of really automatic ways that make it easier to arrive at something like this. If you prep things like your sidechain pathing and know how to build your stuff and intentionally high pass and do whatnot. But does it look like a lot of that happened here? It's possible that it did. It's possible that this was the intentional, like, low-end separation of a thing. Or it was possible that the damage control, like, powers this person has to put this stuff together was enough that they didn't have to do that. And that's just also, like, that's part of what makes the fact that this scans at every rhythmic expression all the more impressive, because the sub isn't there to be a constant, which really helps the cacophony of other songs. Like, a rhythm track would be pure noise if it didn't have that solid sub beneath it. And it often is. And it's usually because there's not a solid sub beneath it. Anyway, food for thought for a lot of stuff like this. If anyone ever wanted to do things like this is like gold star. This, damn. Okay, coming up next, we got a folder with my thing in it that says Terrorform by Kaz. Terrorform, like Terrorform Mars, a very strange anime and manga series. I have both seen and read, and I like it. I like that very weird extrapolation of just like thinking a thing way too far. Does that not just sound like me? That's basically what that stuff is, and I love it. Not unsurprising, I'm also huge fans of Blame and pretty much everything that guy has ever written or done. And hey, have you guys heard Billin's latest stuff? Because if you haven't, you should. Yeah, but we also should hear this. Let's do it. very nice. This sounds like a very well-balanced RTS background piece of music. Actually kind of reminds me of some of the more mellower Command and Conquer 3 stuff. Except for this incredibly powerful sub. So because this hilariously powerful sub is here, this track is pretty much the first time I can remember that people or a person, or I've still selected a track that's been submitted that's actual full-on what the word means bass music. It's a genre and it means things and words change or whatever, but when that thing was new, what it meant essentially was playing around with just basic the subtones and using the entire the range of dynamic range to change the level and have that be the whole point. It was the precursor to what would eventually be things like dubstep and whatnot, but this, like, it started off and like it's called Terrorform, and like it literally it kind of has this machiney beginning, and like it has a tail and a theme, and it plays into it like with the conceptual care and reality that is just very nice, and I like the overall cinematic nature of it, and like the care to the modulations is just a lot, and as well because of how dark it is. Whenever any new kind of little layery bit shows up, you can clearly hear it, and it's interesting. There's a couple of fluttery moments that like are so low power that if it were in a track of mine, you wouldn't even hear it. It'd be destroyed by something. And furthermore, impressiveness, the power level this track has and the darkness that it has with the level of loudness that it has. Because that means that this track does essentially none of the saturation trick breakage that like the genres I typically like represent tend to do. But look at the sausage. Look how good that is. This is not a held back track. It is fully up there at a whole level and there's no damage. It is a totally perfectly dynamically clean thing whole way through. Now, I mentioned this sounded like a good video gamey thing, and this actually is just a perfectly brilliant track all on its own. Like, if this was just a piece of music to listen to, I got nothing to say about it, con-wise. But it actually is designed to be used as a piece of music in a video game, then there's one very large problem, which is how loud the bass is. Because, not that the bass isn't dope, but that's the part that's gonna go when it gets mixed into the game. The rest of this is leveled perfectly. It's one of the reasons, the reason why I'm bringing it up at all is because if this wasn't here and the assumption was just that the rest of this was the track, wouldn't be as cool, but it would work. But what also can work is that you don't have this guy here, but you got the next couple of harmonics, kind of bass guitar style. And that, while not as cool or clean or powerful, lets you still know that there's a note down there when you can't hear the actual fundamental. And that's the only value there is to that when you're playing a version of this that's not being heard at maximum volume and also leaving room for, I don't know what. If it's not a game with explosions, maybe it doesn't matter. But typically, bass stuff that's that kind of powerful is relegated to stuff that the player can do to make it more impactful. It's an immersive thing. Of course, I'm not a game developer. That's incredible pulling out of my ass assumption right there, but it's mostly based on my experience just playing games and listening to the music that comes out of it. Other than like that, just very minor consideration, this is an excellent track. The consideration to all parts of it is just solid gold. People are giving cool stuff today. Up next, we have Operation Apocalypse by JFundy. A good name, if ever. Every generation gets one. Okay. And it ends. Okay. Not a bad time. Mostly a very lengthy individual power level. Not a bad power level, and the mix works out, but we do need some variation and also some suspense. Things like the basic stuff, like when a drop comes, you want the drop to feel powerful by not having sub at the power that it is when it gets there. And you do that by having your intro like it is, but you sort of tease the bits up and have the individual bits and filter in and out. Basically, what you did here, but in reverse. And that helps to make a long arrangement like this have some legs. Because really, like, it's about this. This is the section we want to shine, and everything else in between that is just getting in between it, right? But in between it doesn't have to also be at the same power level. I know I did some tracks like that, and mostly having done that is me getting that it wasn't really super necessary. And it's strange, but a lot of the choices I made when I made tracks like that were mostly about like with a weird expectation that I wasn't going to listen to it. That like not even necessarily the track itself, but even when I was making the drop, that I knew that because this was my primary target, that I had no real consideration for how this works out, and it's like a kind of a bad thought to have. Like I very quite didn't like intros and outros and that kind of thing because I like drops, and that's whatever. But it doesn't mean that you don't want to like put the kind of effort into your time like the way that because again other people are again I guess not again for the first time other people are well crap it was again that time wow did I come from the future um anyway that point is some variation in power timing also like you could pretty well see where it should go and then also just to just make it less ideally you'll have started from here and you'll have gotten there by doing that but this may or may not have been a chronological experience. It doesn't necessarily feel like one. It is arranged properly. You have all the right bits. This is not very far from a sort of well mixed thing. Although I will say that it could use more variation in general. The pattern of notes at least was also quite samey. You might notice that a lot of the tracks I didn't say that to had pretty either no motion in the bass at all, or not even much a lot of bass to say. And here's this moving and actually doing something, and here I am saying that it's too repetitive. What's up with that? Well, while it was true that the other like sort of bass presences weren't really moving around much either, the fact that this is moving around as it is means that if it keeps moving around the same way, suddenly there's a new noticeable angle, and it's repeating, and now there's just an extra layer of thing, and that thing happens to have a repeating value, so it just sort of adds towards what becomes the repetitive feeling, and not just the groove feeling. Like if you want to, a lot of things about human feelings and sensations and sensory stuff are a lot of like the same feelings, but just in different degrees. Like a lot of taste, for example, is a lot of like the same chemical, but just in different intensities. The differences between certain kinds of sweet things and certain kinds of bitter and sour and gross tasting things are all the same one kind of thing, but just at a different level. And a lot of like emotions and feelings are sort of similar. So like the groove feeling, you need a song to have if you want to have a groove. You need a song to have a repetitive bass, like not necessarily the bass instrument, but just BASE, a repetitive foundation from which it can, repeat from, and then vary in a way that like the variation on the groove is actually what you're listening to. It's like the groove is now the canvas. It's not even really the thing you're hearing. It's you're listening for the changes in it to be the interesting thing. So if you have a thing that does it and there's no actual changes in the thing that it's doing, then it's just that's not a groove. That's repetitive. A groove is within which this area that you rock. I'm being really, that's actually extraordinarily literal. We're talking a groove like a record needle and rocking like moving back and forth. Like that's basically the idea. You get yourself in a groove and you rock back and forth. Hilarious. But that's kind of what you want to think of it as, is that like that's your new like sustained sort of average, and now the difference in that each time you go through it is actually the thing that's happening. So it can't be the same thing every time, is all. More variation, but also more targeted variation in the dimensions that it needs to be applied, which is a little bit more advanced. It's not like I just solved it by saying that. It is true. That's the idea, though. Other than that, decent hits, good texture, I like the sound design. Some of that could have had some timing variation too. Basically, a lot of that stuff needs to have like primary tone and character variation, but just everything where it is can be what it is. Different power and variation arrangement is all. Yay. Moving on, we have Sam Tozora with Dragomix. It's a Mixo Drags. I wonder if this implies dragon. I don't know. We'll find out, I think. That was a trip. That was a weird. I didn't see that ending coming at all. I have nothing to say about that ending bad, but all right. So, Ron, what I got here. This is me thinking, okay, this is the drop. That's not. I I mean, there's labels up here, but from where I am, I'm in my room, and the colors they are, I can't really read those. But the sort of the joke I'm making for myself here is that I'm getting here and I'm thinking this mix is weird. And normally when a mix kind of feels off in like a beginning or a mid part, it's usually because someone followed my advice or on their own decided to do the thing where they begin in the middle and then branch out. And you could tell because what'll happen is that when the middle comes, it all feels really like it fits all of a sudden. And it very did that. I got there, and now it's like, okay, this everything that makes perfect sense. So here's a problem, though. Given that this kind of happens a lot, where you do this, and then you have that result where you're essentially you have this kit, right? And this kit is mixed to a T and smushed together to perform this way with this amount of stuff on it. So what happens when you don't have that much stuff on it? And the answer is it doesn't perform the same way. And your question from here is, how do you choose to solve this problem? Is it, or even is it a problem? I'm classifying this. Yeah, I'm classifying this as a problem, but mostly it comes down to this weight and space and sidechaining. This amount of power being blown away, being blown away is not a product of a consideration for this mix. In fact, this is actually kind of a weird drop shadow effect. If you think of this this kick as an object and it's taller, it's the space between the kick and like the plane beneath it is explicitly the room left from this, which feels like it filled up a lot in between, like, I don't know, the weird little rows in the kick here. Like, that's essentially what literally that was, levels-wise and mix-wise, is that this mix, this spacing and sidechaining was considered for this amount of content. Now, your options. Knowing that that's the problem, I'm feeling this. It could just not be a problem. Like, I'm calling it a problem because I very clearly, like, I wouldn't have made that call or left these holes in that way. It just feels slightly off rhythm, whereas the main drop doesn't at all. And I'm assuming that if that's what feels like on to you, that this probably also doesn't. And if that's the case, then the ways are to either just directly do the thing I just said and close up this hole with the timing and your side chaining that you're automated to be true only for when this section is like this. Because the song isn't like this from then on. This is actually a very interesting progressive track because this press section does the job the way it does. And then it is just different coolness all the way to the end, but with all the right power. It's almost like it progressed not just in the music and the sound design and the arrangement, but it also progressed in mixing skill. Like, the time it took to get from this end to this end, you got better at mixing. And you got to bring some of that love back here to make this a fully completed experience, is really what's up with that. But you got to, like, after you make the thing, once you're actually, like, this is something that I also was a little confused about when I was a newer producer, where I would get to something that to this level. And I would be like, wow, this is like, okay, something, a work. I have done it. It is mine. And I am really proud and to say it is. And the first person you show it to goes, yeah, that's a pretty good start. And you're just like, the fuck? And I mentioned that about a previous track. And that track had that issue way more than this one did. Like, that track it had a sparseness to it that definitely screamed, put some detail in there, please. This one has a bit of a percentage of cohesion that could be here that you can only get to once you get to this point, but understand that this isn't complete. Because when you get to here, you can make all that stuff, all that call I just said about this difference. You could be like, oh, but why? Oh. And there's your options are to either adjust the timing directly that we mentioned, or put something else in there that's only here for this section that fills in the space that this did, but without the presence that this has to overshadow it when it comes around. That's the thought, right? You can't do a whole intro drop and expect people not to just be like, this is just the track. They're not going to get through it to get to this if they don't like this. Or, again, they might. Like, it's not even that far off. And I've heard tracks that I've grooved to that had even harder differences in presence and their sidechain profiles from verse to drop. So it's not as though this is bad. I'm mostly describing a bit of a philosophy on what done is, which is that the choices that you made to make this the kit that it isn't just like the reality that you're leaving onto everything else, but then knowing from here you can adjust stuff, and then what it is about this that needs to also be here, but different. So that it is this sort of unified experience, not just in content and level and all that, but sort of presence and weight. Like a good example, sort of not in the genre, is when you write music with more than one guitar for metal bands. Usually what happens is that there'll be a kind of low rhythm like you would do in chords, and then a high guy doing a lead instrument, and maybe a third track doing a harmony. If you do that though, and it's all fully mixed, well, cool guitars, and then the next part is just one of the guitars, or the part is just the one sound, like both guitars are all doing the same thing, then but you just use one guitar to play that part, you've lost this huge presence and power because you did nothing to replace the mix of those two other guitars. And the thing to do there is you actually have to record those two guitars playing that extra part as though they were there playing the part. And then when you do, suddenly the presence lines up. That like there would be this instrument here, but cut down to the version that fits in here in the way that still satisfies this presence, but not this tone. And that's the call to do. But like that's like the last absolute thing I would have said to do about this track before calling it done, because it is just about done and dope. So good job overall. I was also like just a really fun, like happy. I like the energy and music in this musically. I used to do stuff like this. It's kind of like basically a disco kind of funk dancey thing. That's it feels very like mischievous almost, right? You do the crawling chromatic stuff later, and it's kind of fun how that's really just a description of like what kind of minor you want to be in. Because it's like, oh, I could do this sort of like happy, like cocksure almost, sort of confident happiness in a way, a fun, a rad, a jam, versus like you put in a couple of minor seconds in there, and now all of a sudden it's like I'm edgy and serious and like my mischievous nature has consequences, and or you stick to only doing like you do the which one is harmonic minor, the one which one has the major 7, you would do what that one is, and then it sounds all like important and like beautiful but like heavy. And it's weird how that's just a description, that's just a key change, but basically this exact same thing. Yeah, all right, that was fun to consider. All right, good track overall, good gerbs. Coming up next we have Metamorphosis by Divity. Yeah, that's what it says, Divity, not divinity. Divity. Okay. Is that the name? So, I don't know, minor SEO tip. If you make your name sound like a typo, it will suggest the other word. That's all. Okay. Let's hear this. What the All right. Well, I respect the break rhythm that came in the second half there. That was a neat. I don't usually hear that in tracks like that, so that was cool. This actually is exactly how long something like this should be. This is like I like this very much. Like here's the whole thing. It's cool. Here's another version of it, and it's done. Because this track, if it were full, would be just this twice, with full cool variations, sure, but it's just still just this twice. Way too loud in the highs though, like, way too loud. How loud this was made sense, I guess, with that, but like this was a little bit better, but still, that's too loud. Just turn it down like a dB, like a lot. Outside of that, I was gonna say, oh yeah, so the effects, like the sound design on here is neat. I like this airy, noisy texture stuff, like reverby, delay, processed, phaser processed, reverb filter based stuff. High resonance, high scratch, awesome. The thing is though, is that it's hard to get a design difference between a thing that feels like it generates a complexity of harmonics versus a thing that's stuck in a can. And this is a little bit on the edge, and let's talk about some recommendations on how to handle that. So here's an example of like what I mean right here, this end bit. So there is a lot of moving in these sounds, and they're not the same every time. In fact, just about everything about it is different, but you can kind of see how there's like the samey little graphy holes in the spectrum of how the air is processed. And that is the thing that needs to change. It doesn't need to be moving around anywhere particular. It just needs to be different so that you get this kind of actual tonal ownership per note versus a thing that feels like it got slapped into a thing. And the parameters that matter in this case are the primary ones, like whatever kind of primary cutoff or timing of your comb filter or whatever's going on. And then also the resonance values plus some of your source stuff. But one of the things I like to do is to actually adjust the time values to the keyboard data, to the notes, so that it will sort of it won't, if you really care, you can tune it. You can go octave by octave and match up note values and to get to rates and whatnot. But the job isn't to tune it. It's just to make it feel like it has motion per note so that it doesn't sound like it's just the one stuck thing. And a bunch of parameters will do that on whatever thing is doing this. And that's just the job, though, is that you need to figure a way to make the parameters present in a per note kind of this. This experience is very close. It's very good. I would do very minor things to the sound design if I had done it to adjust for all that stuff I just said, because that sounds like work, but it really is, because you could see how you could see the tail match up on the whole thing. And it really just needs to be very, it's still this range, it's still just here, but not this whole ass structure the whole time. Or you could be fun and you could do it section by section. Some of these tracks will do that, like every 4 bars will have a switch up in the thing, and really it was a switch up in the primary character generated of parameter that is the core of whatever the sound design was. Which is a big reason why it sounds like it matches, because it's probably sent through a lot of the same, like a clone of the same signal path. Good strategies there. Decent expression overall. Good leveling. It didn't clip, which was kind of impressive for how loud this was. It doesn't need to be that loud though. Also impressive were pretty much every track on this VTR so far hasn't clipped. And considering some of the incredible noise power and jank that was designed as a deliberate style, and a lot of that, I'm very surprised that everyone had the power to keep everything in control like that. Especially that bass sub track, that was fun. Coming up at the end today, we have Bansha with Abrasive Whip. Yeah, okay. Oh, look at that. All right. Let's have it here, how we have it here, shall we? That was also quite a vibe. I'm enjoying today's batch of pretty dank jank. Let's put it that way. Let's call that a genre, dank jank. I, that earlier track definitely had things that sounded. I mean, I don't know. It's tough to trace the inspirations for lots of things because all I can really give you is the inspirations for things that are associating with the result I'm hearing. And like, it pretty much seems since Doom came out, there was just a really big push for this. It is not like the stuff wasn't around, obviously, and I dug it then too. Like, there are a lot of really neat, like, long art pieces that have just like 14 minutes of noise beats, and that's a lot of fun. But I like that this is getting like the actual like artistic attention it deserves. Like, people having experienced it in a medium are apparently happy to experience it on its own now, and that's nice. Everyone was pretty great today. Those tracks kicked a lot of ass. Thanks for sending them in and watching. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.